I had exactly $1.43 left in my checking account the Christmas Eve my mother-in-law decided to break my daughter. Not because I was poor, because I had transferred everything, every dollar of savings, every liquid asset, every financial reserve I had carefully rebuilt over 3 years into an escrow account that was closing in 11 days. The house at 214 Cedar Ridge Drive had taken everything I had to protect. I was 7 working days away from making that protection permanent in ways Margaret Collins had never imagined possible. And that night, while I was elbow deep in a trauma bay trying to keep a 62-year-old man alive, my 10-year-old daughter was standing in the corner of a dining room with a piece of cardboard hanging around her neck. The cardboard was cut from a shipping box. The words were written in thick black marker and handwriting I recognized immediately because I had seen it on every Christmas card for 6 years. 2 words: family disgrace. My name is Nadia Whitfield. I am 36 years old. I am a licensed structural engineer at a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Ohio, and I have a flaw I have spent years trying to correct. I trust systems more than I trust people. I believe documentation protects you. I believe processes work. What I did not understand, until that Christmas Eve, was that sometimes the people closest to you are counting on you to stay inside the system while they quietly dismantle everything around you. My late husband, Marcus Whitfield, died 22 months before that Christmas. He left behind a daughter who still sleeps with the stuffed elephant he gave her, a mortgage on a property assessed at just over $1 million in the Clintonville neighborhood of Columbus, and a manila envelope he had placed at the bottom of a fireproof safe with a note taped to the outside that read, "Nadia, open this if anything happens. Do not wait. Do not ask my mother first." I waited 18 months before I opened it. That was my mistake. But let me take you back to the beginning. Marcus's family occupied a particular shape in the world. His mother, Renata Whitfield, was 68 years old, a former real estate paralegal, and the kind of woman who understood legal language well enough to use it as a weapon without ever appearing threatening. His brother, Desmond, was 41, perpetually between opportunities, and had lived for 11 months out of the past 3 years in the detached garage apartment behind the Clintonville house, the house that had been in Marcus's name, and then, quietly, in mine. Renata had 2 rules she never stated aloud but enforced with absolute consistency. The first was that Desmond's failures were always temporary and always excusable. The second was that my presence in Marcus's life and in his property was conditional, something to be tolerated as long as I remained cooperative and quiet. I had been cooperative and quiet for 6 years. The first time I understood the shape of that family, Sophie was 4 years old. We were at Thanksgiving at Renata's house in Bexley. Sophie had knocked over a glass of cranberry juice while reaching for the bread basket. It wasn't a dramatic spill. It hit the tablecloth, not the carpet, and she immediately said, "Sorry, Grandma, I didn't mean to." Renata looked at Sophie for a long moment, then looked at me and said with a warm smile, "Desmond was never clumsy as a child. He was very controlled." She said it the way you say the weather is nice, pleasantly, completely, as if she were unaware the sentence had an edge. Marcus reached under the table and squeezed my knee. We both understood. Desmond was the standard. Sophie and I were the comparison. The second time I understood it, Sophie was 7. Marcus had been gone for 4 months. We were at Christmas, the first one without him, and Renata had invited 20 relatives to fill the silence his absence left. During dinner, Desmond mentioned he needed help with his truck payments. Renata looked across the table at me and said, "Marcus would have wanted us to keep the family strong, Nadia. He was so generous with what he had." I said, "I'm sure he would have." She smiled. What she was actually saying, and what I understood 2 years too late, was that she expected access to whatever Marcus had left behind. And she had already begun planning for it. But I need to tell you about the safe first, because everything begins there. Marcus had purchased the Clintonville house 8 years before his death using an inheritance from his paternal grandfather, a man named August Whitfield who had built 3 rental properties over 40 years and left them to his grandchildren in equal shares. Marcus's portion was $340,000. He used it as a down payment on a house that had since appreciated to approximately $1.1 million based on the Columbus metro market at the time I am describing. The mortgage balance was $247,000. The equity was real, substantial, and entirely in Marcus's name when he died. Or so I believed. The manila envelope in the fireproof safe contained 3 documents I did not read until 18 months after his death, 3 months before that Christmas Eve. The first was a quitclaim deed dated 14 months before Marcus died, transferring full ownership of the Clintonville property from Marcus Jerome Whitfield to Nadia R. Whitfield. Recorded with the Franklin County Recorder's Office. Official seal. Notarized. Filed. The second document was a printout from the Franklin County Property Database confirming the deed's recording, with my name listed as the sole owner of record. The third was a letter in Marcus's handwriting on 2 pages of yellow legal paper. I won't read it to you in full. Some things are private. But the first line was, "I know my family. I need you to know where you stand before they decide to tell you." I read that letter on a Tuesday night in October, sitting on the kitchen floor with Sophie asleep down the hall, and I understood 3 things simultaneously. First, Marcus had known. He had seen the architecture of what was coming and built me a foundation before he left. Second, I had spent 18 months living as though I had no ground beneath me, when in fact I had owned every inch of it. Third, Renata Whitfield had spent those same 18 months telling me in various careful ways that I was a guest on Collins on Whitfield land, when she had known or suspected or feared that it was mine. The escrow account I mentioned at the beginning, the $1.43 in checking, was not the house. That was a separate matter entirely. 1 month before Christmas, I had retained a real estate attorney named Gerald Okafor, a former Franklin County public defender who had transitioned to property and trust law and who had a reputation for handling family estate disputes with what his website called surgical precision. I had given him the deed, the property records, Marcus's letter, and something else I had found in a second envelope tucked beneath the first. A document I will tell you about shortly, because the second envelope was the one that changed everything. Gerald had advised me to secure a separate financial account before taking any action, because once Renata understood her position, he expected her to move quickly. I had moved $41,000 into a protected account, my savings, carefully rebuilt over 22 months of working double shifts and refusing every luxury, as a legal buffer. That left $1.43 visible in my checking account and a house worth over $1 million that no one in the Whitfield family knew belonged to me. Not Renata. Not Desmond. Not the church ladies who had been praying for Margaret, for Renata, since Marcus's funeral. When the hospital called on Christmas Eve and my regular sitter was at her parents' in Michigan and my own parents were in Phoenix and there was no one else within 12 minutes of our house, I called Renata. She answered on the second ring, warm and immediate, and said, of course, bring Amara over. We'd love to have her. Her tone was the specific warmth of someone who believed they held something over you. I noted it and chose not to examine it right then because a man was coding in vase 7 and I had to go. Amara. That is my daughter's name. She was 10 years old on Christmas Eve, wearing a plaid green dress she had chosen herself from the sale rack at Target, carrying a small wrapped gift for Renata that she had made at school, a ceramic dish painted with a winter scene, glazed and fired in the art room kiln. She had told me in the car, Grandma Renata always uses dishes, so I thought she would like a special one. I found out what happened that night at 11:43 p.m. when I finally checked my phone between patients and saw 3 missed calls and a text message Amara had sent at 9:17. The text said only, "Mom, I need you." No punctuation. No emoji. Amara used emojis for everything. I called back immediately. Renata answered. Her voice was smooth and controlled. Amara's fine. She's overreacting. Children sometimes need correction. Focus on your shift. I asked to speak with my daughter. Renata said she was in the other room and would call me in the morning. Then she ended the call. I finished my shift at 12:20 a.m., changed in under 4 minutes, and drove to Bexley in 19 minutes through empty Christmas streets. The lights on Renata's block were warm and still. The living room window at her house glowed amber. I knocked twice, and she opened the door in a silk robe, reading glasses on her head, completely composed, as though nothing had occurred, as though it were perfectly ordinary for a 10-year-old child to still be at her grandmother's house at 12:45 on Christmas morning. Amara was sitting on a wooden chair in the far corner of the dining room, not the padded chairs at the table. A hard wooden chair that Renata used for extra guests, pushed into the corner near the buffet. Amara was wearing her coat. Inside the house after midnight, with the heat set at 68 degrees, my daughter was wearing her winter coat because she had been cold and no one had helped her. Around her neck, hung on a piece of yarn, was a square of cardboard approximately 12 by 14 inches cut from a box I recognized, the same corrugated brown cardboard Renata used for packing gifts. Written across it in the black permanent marker Renata kept in her kitchen junk drawer were 2 words in her careful paralegal cursive, family disgrace. The yarn had pressed a thin red line into the back of Amara's neck. I removed the sign carefully. I folded it and placed it in the outer pocket of my coat. I picked up my daughter, who was 10 years old and shivering despite the coat, and I carried her to my car. I buckled her into the passenger seat and turned the heat to maximum and started driving. I said nothing to Renata, not because I had nothing to say, because everything I had to say would be delivered through Gerald Okafor's office by certified mail with return receipt. We were 4 blocks from the house when Amara finally spoke. Her voice was flat and careful the way children's voices get when they've been crying for so long they've gone quiet on the other side of it. She said, "I heard Uncle Desmond talking on the phone at Thanksgiving, Mom. He was in the hallway. He said he needed Grandma to move the account before February or there would be a tax problem." She paused. Tonight at dinner, Aunt Courtney was talking about Uncle Desmond's new truck. So I asked Grandma if she used my college money to buy it. I kept my eyes on the road. What happened after that? Everyone got quiet, Amara said. Uncle Desmond said I was making things up. Grandma said children who tell lies at the dinner table have to learn what it means in this family. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. She got the cardboard from the garage. She made me stand in the corner. She told everyone not to give me any food until I said I was sorry and that I had lied. Did anyone say anything? Aunt Courtney laughed. A pause. The cousins went to watch TV. Nobody said anything, Mom. I pulled the car over on a residential street 2 blocks from our house and turned off the headlights. I sat there for 30 seconds. My hands were completely still on the steering wheel. Then I said, Amara, you did not lie. You told the truth. Do you understand that? She nodded but didn't look up. And asking a question is never a disgrace. Do you hear me? She was asleep before we reached the driveway. I carried her inside, made her a bowl of cereal because the kitchen was warm and she hadn't eaten, and sat beside her until she finished every bite. Then I tucked her in and read 2 pages of her book until her breathing evened out. When her door was closed, I walked to the hallway closet and stood in front of the fireproof safe for the first time since October. I did not open it. I already knew what was inside. Instead, I opened my laptop and placed it on the kitchen table next to the folded cardboard sign and my phone and a legal pad. And I began to document. I am an engineer. I build structures designed to bear weight without failing. What I was about to construct was the most load-bearing document I had ever assembled. Time, date, description, photograph, source. The cardboard sign went into a gallon freezer bag, photographed from 4 angles. Amara's text message, screenshot, timestamped 9:17 p.m. My call log showing Renata's intercept at 11:52. The absence of any call from Renata during the 4 hours my daughter had been sitting in that corner. Each item cataloged. Each one stored in 3 locations before I made coffee. It was 3:51 in the morning. I had 11 days before the escrow closed and 6 hours before I could call Gerald Okafor. And I still hadn't told you about the second envelope. The second envelope had been underneath the first in the safe. It was heavier. It contained a document I had not seen before, something Marcus had apparently obtained in the final months of his life without telling me, possibly because he had not wanted to worry me. possibly because he had not wanted to give me a reason to love his family less than I already did. The document was a copy of a Virginia, of an Ohio 529 college savings account statement issued in Amara's name. The account had been established by Marcus's father, Leonard Whitfield, 10 years earlier with an initial contribution of $75,000 intended to grow for Amara's education. The account balance as of the statement date 14 months before Marcus died was $71,200. Alongside the statement, in Marcus's handwriting on a yellow sticky note, this account still exists. Renata is custodian. Leonard trusted her with it. I'm not sure he should have. I had not known this account existed. In 22 months of managing grief and bills and a child and a full-time job, no one had mentioned it. Not Renata. Not Desmond. Not the estate attorney who had handled Marcus's will, because the 529 was technically a custodial account held outside the estate. It passed directly. It was invisible unless you knew where to look. Amara had overheard Desmond talking about moving an account before a tax deadline. I sat at the kitchen table until 5:15 a.m. staring at the account statement. Then I picked up the cardboard sign and looked at the two words in Renata's careful handwriting, and I thought about a woman who had spent 22 months reminding me that I lived on borrowed ground, who had spent years treating my daughter as a lesser variable in the Whitfield equation, who had apparently been sitting on $71,000 that belonged to Amara's future while feeding Desmond's present. I set the cardboard sign back in the freezer bag and sealed it. Then I put the phone face down and waited until morning. Gerald Okafor's office was in the short North District of Columbus, on the second floor of a converted Victorian building that smelled permanently of old wood and coffee from the cafe across the street. He was 53, deliberate, the kind of attorney who let you finish every sentence before he responded, because he was actually listening rather than preparing. I had brought the red folder. I had started calling it that in my head by then, everything organized in a red accordion file, and I opened it on his desk in the order I had assembled it the night before. He examined the quitclaim deed first. 2 minutes of silence. Then he pulled up the Franklin County Recorder's website, entered the address, and turned his monitor toward me. "You are the sole owner of record," he said. "The deed is valid and properly registered. There are no co-owners, no liens, no encumbrances." He sat back in his chair. "Does Renata Whitfield know this?" "I don't think so," I said. "She's been telling me for nearly 2 years that I'm living on Whitfield family property." Gerald wrote something on his legal pad. "That becomes relevant," he said, "depending on what we find in the 529. He made a call to the financial institution managing the account while I sat across from him. He used his name, my authorization, Amara's social security number, and Leonard Whitfield's name as the original contributor. The institution confirmed the account existed, confirmed the balance would require a formal records request, and confirmed the timeline for receiving complete transaction history, 5 to 7 business days. "While we wait for those records," Gerald said, setting down the phone, "I want to run a standard property check on your address." He typed for 30 seconds and then stopped. He looked at the screen for a moment before speaking. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, using a careful tone I had learned to pay attention to, "your property at the Clintonville address is currently attached to a homestead exemption filing." I frowned. "I didn't file for that." "No," he said. "You didn't." He turned the screen. "The exemption was filed 18 months ago under the name Renata Whitfield, using your property address." He let that settle. In Ohio, a homestead exemption reduces property taxes for qualifying owners at their primary residence. Your property is not Renata Whitfield's primary residence. She has no ownership interest in it whatsoever. He tapped the filing date on the screen. She filed this exemption 8 weeks after Marcus died, when you were still in the acute phase of grief and highly unlikely to be reviewing county tax filings. The room was very quiet for a moment. The smell of coffee from across the street drifted faintly through the window. "How much?" I asked. Gerald calculated quickly using the county assessor's figures. The Ohio homestead exemption for a property with that assessed value reduced annual taxes by approximately $4,100. Over 18 months, that was roughly $6,150 in taxes Renata had avoided paying on a property she did not own. Add the standard 25% civil penalty and applicable interest, and the total liability was approximately $8,400 owed to Franklin County. She used my house to save herself money, I said. For a year and a half, Gerald confirmed. While telling you that you were living on her family's land. I looked at the red folder on his desk. The cardboard sign was in there, sealed in its freezer bag, the yarn still threaded through the 2 holes Renata had cut with scissors to hang it around my daughter's neck. The same woman, the same hands. Gerald outlined the legal options the way a contractor describes load-bearing walls, clearly, without drama, so you understand exactly what holds weight. A 30-day notice to vacate addressed to Desmond Whitfield regarding the garage apartment he continued to occupy without my permission or any formal agreement. A demand letter to Renata Whitfield requesting full repayment of Amara's $529 funds, pending the account records. A formal complaint to the Franklin County Auditor's Office regarding the fraudulent homestead exemption filing. And as a mandatory reporter, I had already decided on this before walking into his office, a report to Franklin County Child Protective Services regarding the events of December 24th. Each of these is independent, Gerald said. You can pursue any combination. All of them, I said. Certified mail. Return receipt on everything. Gerald paused briefly with his pen in the air, in the way that experienced attorneys pause when they are recalibrating the person sitting across from them. You're an engineer? He asked. Structural, I said. Then you understand, he replied, that we're about to apply simultaneous load to every point in this structure. He uncapped a fresh pen. Let's make sure the foundation holds. It took us 2.5 hours to draft the outgoing documents. When I left Gerald's office, I stopped at a FedEx office on High Street and made 3 additional copies of everything, sealed them in separate envelopes, and placed one with my neighbor Patricia, a 74-year-old retired schoolteacher who had lived on our street since the neighborhood was built and who had, on the night of December 24th, seen something from her kitchen window that she hadn't yet told me about. I didn't know that yet, but I would. The Columbus Main Post Office on North 4th Street was quiet the morning of December 27th. One clerk on duty, a man in his mid-60s who handled each envelope with the particular care of someone who understood that the Postal Service is, among other things, a mechanism of consequence. 3 envelopes. Certified mail. Return receipt requested on all 3. The certified labels went on with deliberate efficiency. The stamp on each one landed with a sound I will not overdescribe except to say it felt final in exactly the way finality should feel, irreversible, documented, and completely indifferent to anyone's feelings about it. Envelope 1, 30-day notice to vacate, addressed to Desmond Whitfield, the Clintonville garage apartment. Envelope 2, demand letter, addressed to Renata Whitfield, Bexley, Ohio. Subject, repayment of Ohio $529 custodial account funds belonging to Amara Whitfield. Envelope 3, formal complaint addressed to the Franklin County Auditor's Office regarding a fraudulent homestead exemption filed under Renata Whitfield's name on a property she did not own. Postage total, $26.40. Estimated delivery, December 29th to 30th. The tracking receipts went into the red folder. I photographed each one before leaving the building. Outside, the Columbus winter had the particular gray flatness it gets between Christmas and New Year's, when the holiday decoration seems to overstay and the cold becomes matter-of-fact. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine. On my phone, a text from my colleague Brianna, "How are you and Amara doing? Thinking about you both." I typed back, "Better than we were. I'll explain soon." Then I started the car and drove home. That evening, I did something the engineer in me resisted, but the mother in me required. I put the red folder away. Not forever. Just for the night. Because Amara needed dinner and a movie and her mother's full, undivided presence, not a woman bent over legal documents at the kitchen table. We made pasta from scratch, badly, enthusiastically, flour on every surface, and watched a nature documentary about migratory birds, and Amara fell asleep on the couch with her head on my shoulder before the ending. I carried her to bed and stood in the hallway afterward listening to her breathe. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. USPS tracking update. Envelope 1, out for delivery. Estimated arrival December 29th. Tomorrow. I turned off the kitchen light and let the house go quiet around me. The first call came at 11:14 a.m. on December 29th, 47 minutes after the tracking app confirmed envelope 2 delivered, signed by R. Whitfield. I let it ring. Renata's voicemail arrived in 3 segments over the following 90 minutes, each one a different temperature. The first was precise and controlled, the voice of a woman who believed her tone still carried authority. Nadia, I received your attorney's letter. I think there has been a significant misunderstanding about the account, and I'd like to discuss this as a family before it goes any further. Call me today. The second voicemail was warmer and more careful, which meant she had thought about the first one and decided it sounded too much like a threat. Nadia, I've been thinking about Amara all week. I know Christmas was difficult, and I may have overreacted, but she needs her grandmother. Let's not make this uglier than it needs to be. I have always treated this family's finances responsibly, and I can show you the records. The third voicemail arrived at 1:07 p.m. and was the one I saved in 3 separate locations because Renata Whitfield, former real estate paralegal, woman who understood legal language better than most people who had never passed the bar, said something in the third voicemail that no amount of subsequent explanation could undo. Her voice had gone slightly tight, the compressed sound of someone who was frightened and trying not to show it. Nadia, I need you to understand that the money in that account was not simply sitting there. Desmond had a situation, and the money was moved temporarily, and it was always going to be replaced before Amara needed it. That is not stealing. That is family helping family during a crisis. If you had come to me directly instead of going to a lawyer, we could have handled this privately. I need you to call Gerald Okafor and withdraw that letter. I played it once. Then I played it again. Then I transcribed it word for word into a document, time-stamped it, and sent the audio file to Gerald. She had just confirmed the withdrawals. On a recorded voicemail. Voluntarily. Some evidence you spend weeks building carefully in a folder. Other evidence panics and calls your cell phone. Desmond arrived at the house at 2:40 p.m. He did not call first. I know he did not call first because I was in the backyard with Amara when I heard a car door and then real knocking, the kind that communicates anger through a closed door. I came around the side of the house and saw him on the front porch, the 30-day notice crumpled in one hand, his jaw set in the way men's jaws set when they know they're wrong but have committed to the argument anyway. Raven, Nadia, he said, catching himself. You can't do this. I've been staying here for years. Marcus never had a problem with it. I stayed on the sidewalk, approximately 8 feet from the porch steps. Desmond, you've received legal notice. The garage apartment is my property. I need it vacated within 30 days. Marcus would not have wanted this. Marcus, I said carefully, is the one who made sure this property was mine. Not yours. Not your mother's. Mine. What are you talking about? You'll want to speak with an attorney, I said. I'm going inside now. He stood on the porch for another 90 seconds. The Ring camera I had installed 6 weeks earlier quietly, after Gerald suggested it during our first consultation, captured all of it in high definition, including the moment Desmond picked up the ceramic pot beside the front door, appeared to consider throwing it, set it back down, and walked to his car. I filed the footage immediately and sent it to Gerald with a note, possible harassment, preserved for record. That evening, Amara's school friend's mother texted me. She had seen something on the Clintonville Neighbors Facebook group. Renata's daughter-in-law, Desmond's girlfriend, Courtney, had posted in the neighborhood forum, asking for prayers for a grandmother whose grandchild is being kept from her by a bitter family dispute. She has done nothing but love and support this family. Real families stick together. The post had 63 reactions and 22 shares by the time I saw it. I read it twice. Then I screenshotted it, saved it, and did not respond. Not online, not privately, not at all. Silence in these situations is not weakness. It is the refusal to participate in a narrative that is already losing. The next morning, I walked to Patricia Summerfield's house. Patricia was 74, had lived on our block for 31 years, grew vegetables in raised beds in her backyard, and had a habit of sitting at her kitchen table by the window in the early evening with a cup of tea. She opened the door before I knocked, as if she had been expecting me, and said only, "I saw something that night, Nadia. I should have called you sooner. I'm sorry I didn't." She had been sitting at her kitchen table on the night of December 24th at approximately 9:05 p.m. when she saw, through her window, Amara being brought onto Renata's front porch in her coat. The porch light was on. An adult woman Patricia identified as Renata was visible in the doorway. Amara stood on the porch in the December cold. The temperature that night was 29 degrees, for what Patricia estimated at 4 to 5 minutes, while a conversation occurred that Patricia could not fully hear, but described as one-sided and sharp. Patricia had a phone in her hand and had begun recording before she fully understood why, the instinct of someone who has lived long enough to know when something is wrong. The video was 17 seconds long. It showed Amara's silhouette on the lit porch, Renata's voice audible if not fully intelligible, and a timestamp of 9:07 p.m. Patricia had already called Franklin County Child Protective Services that morning, independently, before I arrived at her door. She had given them her name, her address, and her video. I stood on Patricia's porch in the January cold and felt something shift beneath me, not unsteadily, but the opposite, the feeling of a structural load distributing correctly across a foundation that was holding. I had not asked Patricia to be a witness. She had decided to be one on her own. That mattered to me in a way I am still not entirely able to articulate. I thanked her. She pressed my hand once and said, "You raise a good child, Nadia. That girl didn't deserve what happened." Then she went inside to water her plants, and I walked home through the cold with one more piece of evidence I hadn't known existed and the quiet understanding that sometimes the truth has its own allies. The CPS investigator arrived on January 3rd. Her name was Detective. Her name was Investigator Carla Fuentes, and she had a manner that reminded me of the best attending physicians I had ever worked alongside, completely present, completely neutral, giving nothing away while absorbing everything. She spoke with Amara privately in the living room for 24 minutes while I waited in the kitchen, both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold before I remembered to drink it. When Fuentes finished, she joined me at the kitchen table. "Your daughter is consistent, specific, and composed," she said. She described the sign, the denial of food, the duration of the punishment, and the adult family members present. She also described the reason for the punishment, specifically that she had asked about a financial account she had overheard being discussed. Fuentes paused. "This office received a second independent report this week from a neighbor who provided video footage from the evening of December 24th. The footage, combined with your daughter's account, is sufficient to open a formal investigation for emotional abuse and neglect against Renata Whitfield and Desmond Whitfield as a contributing party." She told me the investigation timeline, 30 days for the initial determination. During that period, they would formally advise that unsupervised contact between Amara and Renata Whitfield was not recommended. Before she left, Fuentes stopped in the doorway and looked back at me. "Your daughter told me something at the end of our conversation," she said. I asked her how she was feeling now, and she said, "Better." My mom took the sign off. Fuentes held my gaze for a moment. "I thought you should know that." After she left, I stood at the kitchen counter for a long time. Amara was in her room doing homework, pencil tapping against her desk in the steady rhythm she had when she was concentrating. The house was warm. The radiators ticked. Outside the window, the elm tree in the front yard had gone skeletal in the January cold, and the sky above Columbus was the particular pale gray that means the temperature is going to drop overnight. I picked up my phone, opened Gerald's number, and typed, "CPS opened formal investigation. Investigator confirmed second witness and footage. I'll call you in the morning." Then I put the phone in my pocket and went to check on Amara's homework. The 529 account records arrived on January 10th, 7 business days after Gerald's formal request. He called me at 8:42 in the morning, before I had left for work, and his voice had the particular quality of a man who has practiced keeping his tone neutral and is currently working hard to maintain it. The transaction history came back, he said. 31 withdrawals. They begin 19 months ago, approximately 3 months after Marcus died, and they continue through last month. Total withdrawn, $68,400. A pause. The receiving account is a personal checking account at Midwest Community Bank registered to Desmond A. Whitfield. I sat down at the kitchen table. Gerald continued. Renata Whitfield authorized every transfer as custodian. Under Ohio 529 regulations, custodial withdrawals are only legal if used for qualified education expenses for the beneficiary, in this case, Amara. No transfer in this transaction history corresponds to any educational expense. No tuition. No school fees. No books. No documentation of any educational purpose. All $68,000 went to Desmond, I said. Every dollar, Gerald confirmed. Over 19 months, while Renata told anyone who would listen that she was protecting this family's future. He let that settle, then continued. The demand letter gave her until January 20th to repay the funds. I have received no payment, no contact from her attorney, and no acknowledgement of the letter beyond her voicemail to you, which she is presumably now very aware she should not have recorded. A brief pause. On January 21st, I will file a civil action in Franklin County Common Pleas Court. The complaint will name both Renata and Desmond Whitfield. Charges: breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of custodial funds, and unjust enrichment. What's the total we'd be seeking? I asked. $68,400 in principal. Attorney fees and court costs. Applicable federal 529 penalty for non-educational withdrawals, which Renata as custodian is personally liable for. A realistic total judgment would be in the range of $76,000 to $79,000. He paused one more time. Nadia, I want to be direct with you. Between the 529 action, the homestead fraud complaint, the CPS investigation, and the vacancy notice, you have 4 simultaneous legal pressures on 2 people who, based on that voicemail, have no coherent legal strategy and no apparent financial resources to defend properly. This is not a complicated case. The documentation is nearly airtight. What I need to know is whether you want to proceed on all fronts or conserve for primary action. All fronts, I said. This isn't revenge, Gerald. It's the structural consequence of choices they made. Then let's make sure the load is distributed correctly, he said, which was the closest a 53-year-old attorney had ever come to speaking my language. January 20th came and went. No payment arrived. No attorney contacted Gerald's office. No communication of any kind from Renata or Desmond beyond a text message I received from an unknown number on the 19th, a number I traced through a reverse lookup to Courtney, Desmond's girlfriend, that read, "You are destroying a family over money. You should be ashamed." I forwarded it to Gerald as documentation and did not reply. On January 21st, Gerald filed in Franklin County Common Pleas Court. The complaint was 32 pages. I had reviewed every paragraph. I knew every number by memory the way engineers know load calculations, not because they're trying to impress anyone, but because accuracy is what keeps structures standing. The process server reached the Bexley address at 2:17 p.m. on January 23rd. Renata signed for it herself. I know this because the return receipt came back with her signature, her precise, formal handwriting that I recognized from 6 years of Christmas cards, and a timestamp I photographed and placed in the red folder. The same afternoon, the process server attempted delivery of the co-defendant summons to Desmond at the garage apartment. He was there. He refused to take the envelope. The server placed it on the step, noted the refusal on his paperwork, and the service was valid under Ohio rules. 20 minutes later, Desmond's car left the garage apartment driveway at speed, and for the next 11 days, he did not return. When he came back, it was with a rented trailer and the particular quietness of a man who has run the math and understood the answer. He vacated on February 1st, the 31st day. I watched from the kitchen window. Not with satisfaction, exactly. With the feeling an engineer has when a calculation proves correct, the relief of structural integrity confirmed. He loaded the trailer in 2 hours, took the items he had brought, left a cracked window in the garage apartment that I photographed and sent to Gerald for a property damage claim, and did not knock on the main house door. He drove past Patricia Summerfield's house on his way out of the street. Patricia was in her front yard in a winter coat checking her raised beds. She watched him leave without waving. Renata called me on February 4th. She had not called since the voicemail sequence in December, and her attorney, a general practitioner in Bexley who handled mostly wills and closings and was visibly outside his element, had sent one letter requesting an extension on the civil response deadline that Gerald had addressed through proper channels. When her name appeared on my phone that morning, I closed the kitchen door so Amara wouldn't hear, sat on the edge of the bed, and answered. Nadia. Her voice was different. The paralegal precision was still there in the structure of her sentences, but underneath it, something had shifted. She sounded reduced. Not broken, not precisely, but smaller than she had been. I know I don't have a right to call you. You don't, I said. A long pause. I made a serious mistake with Amara. The sign, what I did that night, I know it was wrong. I was angry and I humiliated a child, and that was wrong. Her voice tightened slightly. But she is all I have left of Marcus. She has his eyes. She has his way of looking at things straight on. I cannot lose her the way I lost him. I closed my eyes for a moment. I was not unmoved. I want to say that clearly. The grief in her voice was real, because grief at least is honest in a way that manipulation is not. But I had learned, over the years and especially over the past 6 weeks, to hear what a person was saying beneath what they were feeling. Renata, I said, I am not keeping Amara from you to punish you. I am protecting her from what you did. Those are not the same thing. I paused. When CPS closes their investigation, when you have completed the family counseling program they recommended, and when your attorney contacts Gerald's office to discuss a supervised visitation arrangement, we can have that conversation. Not before. Silence on the line. You do not contact me or Amara outside of that process, I said. That is the boundary. It is not negotiable, and it will not change based on how the call is going. I heard her exhale slowly. All right, she said, very quietly. All right, I said. And I ended the call. The call had lasted 53 seconds. I logged it in the red folder. Have it. And then I sat on the edge of the bed for a minute, my hands steady, my jaw tight, listening to Amara in the next room asking the dog. We had gotten a dog in January, a small mixed breed from the Franklin County shelter, because Amara had asked every week for 6 months and I had finally run out of reasons to say not yet, asking the dog whether it preferred the blue bowl or the red one. The dog, apparently, had no strong opinion. The Franklin County Common Pleas Court issued a default judgment on March 11th. Renata and Desmond had not appeared. Their attorney had filed one inadequate response that Gerald addressed in a 6-page reply that the court found sufficient to proceed. The judge, whose name I will tell you because it matters to me that this is documented accurately, the Honorable Dale R. Hutchins, read into the record the total judgment amount, $68,400 in converted custodial funds, $9,220 in applicable federal 529 penalties, $6,800 in attorney fees, and court costs. Total, $84,420. The courtroom held 11 other people that day, most of them waiting on their own matters. When Judge Hutchins read the figure, the room did what rooms do in those moments. It went quiet for a beat, the specific silence that falls when a number large enough to restructure someone's life becomes official. Gerald initiated wage garnishment the following week. Desmond had recently taken a position at a logistics company in Reynoldsburg. Under Ohio law, a percentage of every paycheck would now be automatically withheld and applied to the judgment. He would be paying this back across a significant portion of his working years. The Franklin County Auditor's Office completed their homestead exemption review in mid-February. Their determination, the exemption had been fraudulently filed on a property Renata Whitfield did not own. A tax bill for $8,400, back taxes, penalties, and interest was issued to Rebecca's address with a 90-day payment deadline. Renata's attorney requested a payment plan. The auditor's office, which does not negotiate emotional context, approved a plan with interest. The CPS investigation closed at the end of February with a finding of substantiated emotional abuse and neglect committed against a minor by Renata Whitfield. Desmond was listed as a contributing party. The official recommendation required completion of a court-approved family counseling program before any supervised contact with Amara could be considered. As of the date I am telling you this story, Renata has not enrolled. Courtney's Facebook post remained visible. Travis's, Desmond's Facebook post remained visible. But facts accumulate in a way that makes certain narratives increasingly difficult to maintain. Several members of the extended Whitfield family grew quiet in the weeks following the court judgment. Not apologetic, mostly, but quiet in the way families go quiet when documentation replaces storytelling. In March, I opened a new Ohio 529 account for Amara. The $2,800 remaining in the original account, the small fraction of Leonard Whitfield's original investment that had not been touched, perhaps because Renata had lost track of it in the transfers, was moved to the new plan. I was listed as sole custodian. A separate authorization existed naming Gerald Okafor as a secondary oversight contact, a precaution I will never be embarrassed about. I set up an automatic monthly contribution through the hospital's payroll deduction. $210 per month, modest but certain. My financial advisor, a woman at the hospital's employee assistance program who handled staff consultations on Tuesday afternoons, told me that at a projected 7% annual return, the new account would be meaningful by the time Amara was 18. It won't replace what was taken, I told her. It doesn't have to, she said. It just has to belong to her, cleanly, without anyone else's signature on it. I thought about that sentence for days afterward. 1 week after the judgment, I returned to Marcus's fireproof safe. Not for legal documents this time. For the letter. The one in his handwriting, 2 pages on yellow legal paper, the one I had read 3 months earlier on the kitchen floor. I had not read it again since. I sat at the kitchen table in the early morning, before Amara was awake, with coffee and the pale light coming through the window, and I read it again. I won't tell you everything it said, but I'll tell you the part that I needed to hear in March more than I had needed to hear it in October. I know you'll be afraid that protecting yourself means destroying what's left of us. It doesn't. What we were, the real part, that doesn't live in anyone's decision about property or money. It lives in Amara. Take care of her. Take care of yourself first, so you can. You are allowed to occupy the space I left you. Don't shrink out of politeness. I folded the letter back along its creases and returned it to the envelope. Then I placed it in the box along with the deed, the 529 statement, a photograph of Amara and me from the previous Thanksgiving, and the only remaining piece of the cardboard sign. I had meant to keep the sign whole as documentation, but at some point over the winter Amara had asked me what was in the freezer bag on the high shelf in the closet. I told her simply that it was something I was keeping safe. She thought about that for a moment and said, "Okay, but you don't have to keep it if it makes you sad, Mom. You can let some things go." I threw away the sign the next day. I kept the photograph I had taken of it for Gerald's file. The record remained. The object did not have to. 1 year later. The dogwood tree outside the kitchen window bloomed in April in the particular way Columbus dogwoods bloom, abruptly, extravagantly, as though apologizing for the long winter by overstating the spring. Amara stood at the window in her pajamas and said it looked like the tree had decided to be loud about being alive. I thought that was the most accurate description of a dogwood I had ever heard. She was in 5th grade and had recently joined the school's Architecture and Design Club, a Thursday afternoon program where students built small structures from cardboard and balsa wood and learned about load and balance and why things stand instead of falling. Her teacher emailed me in April to say Amara had given a 5-minute presentation to the group about why triangles are the strongest shape in construction. She ended it, the teacher wrote, by saying that her mom taught her that the most important thing about a structure isn't how it looks. It's what it can hold without breaking. The whole room was quiet after that. I thought you should know. The garage apartment had been converted over the winter into what Amara was calling her studio lab, a hybrid art and design space with a pegboard for supplies, a drafting table I had found at an estate sale in Grandview, and a shelf she had built herself from pine boards and metal brackets, slightly crooked and completely sturdy. She spent Saturday mornings in there with the door open and the small space heater running and the dog asleep on a folded blanket in the corner. Brianna from my office had become a regular Thursday dinner presence. She brought food every time and was categorically incapable of arriving empty-handed. Amara had started calling her Auntie B without any adult prompting, which seemed to settle something in Brianna that she didn't talk about directly, but that was visible in the way she relaxed in our kitchen. Some families are built from what you choose rather than what you inherit. The red folder was still on the bookshelf in the living room. I did not hide it. I also did not explain it to visitors unless they asked. It sat between Amara's school yearbook from 4th grade and a copy of a structural engineering reference I had been meaning to reread for 2 years. If Amara ever asked about it, I would tell her the truth, all of it, in the version appropriate to her age. She was already braver and more honest than most adults I knew. She could handle truth. She had proven that at a dinner table on Christmas Eve at 10 years old, with a cardboard sign around her neck, and she had not apologized for it once. One Saturday in May, we sat at the kitchen table with the window open to the first genuinely warm morning of the year, and Amara was drawing on the back of an envelope, the way she drew when she was thinking without a specific goal. She drew a house first, a careful rectangle with clean lines and a door, and then beside it a smaller structure, the studio lab, connected to the main house by a path she drew in small, deliberate dots. Above both she drew the elm tree, oversized and spreading. Below the image, in her careful block printing, she wrote 2 words, "Our property." She slid it across the table to me. "For you," she said. I picked it up and looked at it for a long moment. The 2 structures, the path between them, the tree spreading above. 2 words that meant something different than they had a year ago, or 5 years ago, or at any point before Marcus left me a deed in a fireproof safe and trusted me to understand what it meant. "Where should we put it?" she asked. I folded it carefully and placed it inside Marcus's box, next to his letter, next to the deed, next to the original 529 statement. The box did not feel like something to avoid anymore. It felt like what it was, a record of the structure we had built together across years and loss and legal filings and one December night I will never forget, and the particular morning light coming through a window in the spring, and a child who had inherited her father's eyes and her father's way of looking at things straight on, and had decided, after everything, to keep drawing. I closed the lid of the box and left it on the shelf where I could reach it. The small string of lights along the front porch, which Amara had asked me not to take down at Christmas, blinked once in the morning breeze. We were home. It had always been ours. Now we both knew it. I spent a long time thinking I could keep the peace by staying small, by not asking questions about accounts and tax filings and property records, by accepting the story other people told about where I belonged. But I learned something over those 6 months that I want to leave you with, because I think some of you know exactly what I mean when I say this. Staying quiet to keep the peace is not peace. It is just silence arranged to look like agreement. The moment I stopped performing patience and started protecting my daughter, everything that was genuinely mine became visible. The house, the accounts, the ground under my feet. None of it was new. None of it had appeared suddenly. It had been there the whole time, waiting for me to stop looking away from it. If you have been sitting on something that belongs to you, a truth, a boundary, a piece of documentation in a safe you have not opened in 18 months, I want you to know that the system can work in your favor. It is slow. It requires paperwork. It requires a lawyer who listens and a neighbor who decides to tell the truth and a child who asks an honest question at a dinner table even when everyone in the room goes quiet. But it works. And the moment you stop waiting for permission to occupy the space that is already yours, things begin to move. Thank you for staying until the end of the story. If any part of it felt familiar, if you've ever had to protect something that belonged to you from someone who believed they had the right to take it, I'd like to hear from you in the comments. These stories matter more when they reach the people who need them. If this one should reach someone you know, share it forward. And if you want more stories about the quiet courage it takes to stand firm when the people closest to you are counting on you to stay silent, subscribe and turn on notifications. I'll see you in the next one.